I never expected my father's 70th birthday dinner to become the night I discovered he had been ranking his grandchildren like contestants in some twisted competition. Walking into Romano's steakhouse that Tuesday evening with my 7-year-old son, Dylan, I thought we were heading to a celebration. The hostess led us through the dimly lit restaurant toward a private dining room where my family waited. Dylan clutched a small wrapped gift he had made in art class, excited to give Grandpa Frank the painted picture frame, decorated with glitter and stickers. But the moment we stepped through those doors, everything changed. My father looked up from the head of an elegant table set for 8 and pointed toward a tiny corner table, meant for 2. "Adults and real grandkids here," he announced coldly. Dylan's face crumpled as he realized he would be eating alone. The shock of those words hit me like a physical blow, but what came next revealed the true depth of my father's calculated cruelty. When I demanded an explanation for this heartless seating arrangement, Frank produced a laminated chart from his leather briefcase with the satisfaction of a corporate executive presenting quarterly earnings. The professional-looking document listed all 6 of his grandchildren in ranked order, complete with numerical scores and detailed justifications for their placement based on what he called objective performance metrics. Dylan's name appeared at the bottom in red ink, marked with a devastating score of 12 out of 100 possible points. The clinical precision of this assessment made my stomach turn, as I realized Frank had been systematically evaluating and categorizing his grandchildren for months without anyone's knowledge or consent. This ranking system reflects careful analysis and accountability. Frank explained adjusting his reading glasses as he traced his finger down the color-coded categories with obvious pride. Brandon earned 93 points through his tennis tournament victories and consistent honor roll achievements. Sarah and Emma scored 87 and 85, respectively, for their early acceptance into Harvard preparatory programs and leadership positions in student government. My brother Marcus nodded approvingly from his position across the mahogany table, cutting into his perfectly prepared prime rib, with the satisfaction of someone whose children had exceeded expectations. His wife Jessica dabbed her lips with an embroidered cloth napkin, before adding her own commentary about the educational value of Frank's systematic approach. This methodology makes perfect sense from a developmental psychology perspective. She declared with the authority of someone who had read parenting books but never questioned whether love should be conditional. Competition naturally breeds excellence and motivation. Our children understand they must earn privileges through consistent performance and dedicated effort rather than expecting rewards simply for existing. The waitstaff moved efficiently around our tables, creating a stark visual contrast that perfectly illustrated Frank's deliberate discrimination. Dylan received a basic hamburger, served on a disposable paper plate with plastic utensils, while his cousins enjoyed elaborate lobster tails and aged steaks, presented on fine china with proper silverware. Every detail had been orchestrated to demonstrate the hierarchy Frank had established among his grandchildren. The scoring system incorporates multiple evaluation criteria to ensure comprehensive assessment. Frank continued warming to his favorite subject with the enthusiasm of someone who believed his analytical approach represented innovative grandparenting. Academic performance accounts for 40% of the total score, reflecting the fundamental importance of educational achievement. Athletic accomplishments represent 30%, demonstrating physical development and competitive spirit. Social development and leadership qualities comprise 20%, while the final 10% evaluates overall potential for future success in adult endeavors. Dylan's scores painted a devastating picture, according to Frank's rigid metrics. His ongoing struggles with reading comprehension had earned him failing grades in the academic category, despite his teacher's assurances that he was making steady progress appropriate for his age and learning style. His natural preference for creative activities over competitive sports resulted in 0 athletic points, completely disregarding his genuine talents and interests. Frank had somehow quantified Dylan's quiet, thoughtful nature as social deficiency worth minimal credit on his arbitrary scale. But the revelation that truly shocked me came when Frank announced this dinner represented merely the opening phase of his comprehensive motivational program, designed to help Dylan improve his family, standing through structured challenges and measurable objectives. Dylan will receive opportunities to enhance his ranking through a series of carefully planned activities over the coming months. Frank declared pulling out a thick folder containing detailed schedules, benchmarks, and evaluation criteria. Successful completion of these developmental tasks will earn him graduated privileges, including eventual consideration for seating arrangements at the family table, alongside his more accomplished cousins. The folder contained charts tracking reading speed improvements, athletic skill assessments, and social interaction goals that would determine Dylan's treatment at future family gatherings. Frank had developed an entire curriculum focused on transforming my 7-year-old son into someone worthy of his grandfather's approval and affection. The other grandchildren listened to these explanations with varying degrees of understanding, but their reactions revealed how effectively Frank had already poisoned their relationships with Dylan. Brandon smirked with the superiority of someone who enjoyed his position at the top of an artificial hierarchy, while the twins whispered and giggled as they glanced toward Dylan's isolated corner. Even 9-year-old Tommy seemed to understand that his cousin occupied the lowest position in some important family ranking that determined how adults treated different children. This systematic approach eliminates favoritism and emotional bias. Frank concluded with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he had solved complex family dynamics through logical analysis. Dylan's current placement reflects his demonstrated performance, rather than subjective preferences or misguided sympathy. Improvement is entirely within his control if he chooses to make necessary efforts and adjustments to his behavior and priorities. I realized with growing horror that Frank wasn't implementing temporary discipline or motivation tactics. He had created a permanent caste system within our family that would follow these children throughout their development, shaping their relationships with each other and their understanding of how love and acceptance worked in the world. Sadwar Part 3. The psychological torture escalated rapidly as dinner progressed, and the other grandchildren began actively participating in Dylan's systematic humiliation under their grandfather's approving supervision. Brandon Marcus's 12-year-old son initiated the cruelty with calculated precision that revealed how thoroughly Frank had coached the children in their roles within his ranking system. "Look at the family reject sitting all by himself over there," Brandon announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, pointing dramatically at Dylan's isolated corner, while triggering waves of laughter from his younger cousins. Maybe if he wasn't so completely stupid and weird, Grandpa would actually let him sit with the real family members who matter. Instead of correcting this appalling behavior, Frank actually nodded with satisfaction, viewing the cruel commentary as evidence that his system was effectively teaching important life lessons about performance and consequences. His response revealed the depths of his psychological manipulation and complete disconnection from normal human empathy. Honest peer feedback provides valuable learning opportunities. Frank declared cutting into his expensive steak with deliberate precision while completely ignoring Dylan's visible distress. Protecting children from realistic assessments of their behavior and capabilities does them no favors in preparing for adult challenges and professional environments where mediocrity receives appropriate consequences. The twins, Sarah and Emma, joined the systematic bullying by making exaggerated sad faces and fake crying sounds whenever they glanced toward Dylan's table, mockingly imitating his emotional responses, while their parents watched with amused tolerance. Even 9-year-old Tommy participated by making faces and hand gestures designed to maximize Dylan's humiliation and isolation. When Dylan attempted to ignore the relentless taunting by focusing on his simple meal, Brandon escalated the harassment by throwing dinner rolls across the space between tables. Each piece of bread that bounced off Dylan's chair triggered fresh explosions of laughter from the other children, creating a feeding frenzy of cruelty that the adults not only permitted, but actively encouraged. Boys will be boys. Marcus chuckled when I shot him an expression of disbelief and anger. They're just engaging in natural childhood interactions and having harmless fun. Dylan needs to develop much thicker skin and better coping mechanisms if he expects to survive in the competitive real world, where feelings don't matter as much as results and performance. My sister Claire, who had remained uncomfortably silent throughout most of this systematic abuse, finally gathered enough courage to lean toward me with her smartphone displaying images that made my blood run cold with recognition and regret. Photo after photo revealed an established pattern of exclusion and discrimination that had been occurring for over a year while I remained obliviously focused on work and personal responsibilities. This definitely isn't the first time Frank has implemented this system, Claire whispered urgently, scrolling through dozens of family gathering images that told a devastating story of systematic psychological abuse. He's been building toward this dinner for months, gradually increasing Dylan's isolation, while conditioning everyone else to view it as normal and justified. Christmas morning photographs showed Dylan opening his meager presents alone in a corner, while the other grandchildren formed joyful clusters around Frank's elaborate tree, sharing expensive gifts and creating memories from which Dylan was deliberately excluded. Family vacation pictures revealed group poses that consistently positioned Dylan standing awkwardly apart from his cousins, or completely absent from frame, despite being present at these supposedly inclusive gatherings. Frank has been documenting everything obsessively. Claire continued nodding toward Frank's leather portfolio that bulged with organized evidence of Dylan's perceived failures and behavioral inadequacies. Dad maintains detailed records of what he calls Dylan's incidents and developmental shortcomings. He's been systematically building a comprehensive case against your son for over 12 months. The restaurant manager approached our private dining room twice during this escalating nightmare, clearly concerned about the disturbance our family was creating and the obvious distress of a young child. Dylan's quiet sobbing had intensified to visible shaking, and other diners were beginning to stare through the glass doors at our supposedly celebratory gathering. Frank dismissed these professional interventions with practiced authority, presenting himself as a concerned grandfather, implementing necessary disciplinary measures for a challenging child who required structured consequences to develop appropriate behavior patterns. Children must learn that poor choices and insufficient effort produce natural consequences. He explained to the worried manager with the confident tone of someone accustomed to having his authority respected. This young man is experiencing the logical result of his own decisions and performance deficits. Sometimes temporary discomfort proves necessary for genuine growth and character development. The most devastating revelation came when Frank opened his leather portfolio and displayed page after page of handwritten documentation chronicling Dylan's perceived failures with the thoroughness of a clinical researcher studying human behavior. He had recorded every instance of Dylan's struggle with reading aloud during class, documented each missed goal in recreational soccer games, and somehow obtained copies of every school assignment that had received less than perfect grades. Maintaining comprehensive records allows for objective evaluation and progress tracking. Frank explained with the detached professionalism of someone completely disconnected from emotional reality. Subjective responses and parental bias cloud accurate judgment, but systematic data collection provides clarity about specific areas requiring targeted intervention and improvement strategies. Frank displayed charts showing Dylan's reading speed compared to grade-level averages graphs, tracking his soccer performance against league statistics, and behavioral assessments based on teacher comments and peer interactions. Every aspect of my son's development had been analyzed, categorized, and found inadequate according to Frank's impossible standards. The final devastating blow landed when Frank announced his intention to restructure his entire estate, planning and inheritance distributions based on these grandchild rankings, ensuring that his systematic discrimination would extend far into the future and affect these children's opportunities throughout their adult lives. Financial resources should support family members who demonstrate genuine commitment to excellence and family values, Frank declared, while completely oblivious to Dylan's devastated expression and the psychological damage he was inflicting. College funds, property inheritance, and monetary distributions will reflect each grandchild's proven value to our family legacy and their likelihood of using these resources responsibly and productively. I finally understood that Frank wasn't just humiliating Dylan for a single evening of cruel entertainment. He was implementing a comprehensive system designed to systematically destroy my son's developing sense of self-worth, while conditioning his cousins to view Dylan as inferior and undeserving of basic family loyalty, love, or support. Part 4. Dylan's fragile emotional state reached a devastating breaking point when his trembling hands, shaking from prolonged stress and humiliation, accidentally knocked over his water glass and sent liquid cascading across the small table surface and onto the restaurant's expensive carpeted flooring. The simple accident, caused entirely by his distress from the ongoing psychological abuse, triggered an explosive reaction from Frank that shocked even the other adults into momentary uncomfortable silence. This incident perfectly exemplifies exactly what I mean about Dylan's fundamental lack of self-control and situational awareness. Frank roared, standing so abruptly that his heavy chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor and drew attention from nearby dining rooms. 7 years old, and this child still cannot manage basic motor functions or maintain appropriate behavior in public settings. This embarrassing display demonstrates precisely why Dylan requires intensive structure, consistent consequences, and immediate corrective intervention. Frank marched over to Dylan's isolated corner table with the aggressive posture of a drill sergeant confronting a disappointing recruit, beginning an intense verbal assault that reduced my son to terrified silence, while other diners watched in horror. Instead of showing any compassion for an obviously distressed child, Frank seized this minor accident as confirmation of his cruel assessment and justification for even harsher treatment. Proper cleanup technique involves systematic coverage of the affected area using appropriate materials and efficient methods. Frank instructed with the same condescending tone he might use to train an incompetent employee who had repeatedly failed basic tasks. Random dabbing accomplishes nothing except wasting resources and prolonging the cleanup process while creating additional work for restaurant staff who shouldn't have to deal with preventable messes. I watched in growing fury as my 7-year-old son struggled with inadequate cocktail napkins, desperately trying to absorb the spilled water, while his grandfather provided running commentary on every movement and gesture. Dylan's small hands worked frantically to clean up the mess, while Frank critiqued his technique and berated him for lacking coordination and common sense. During this humiliating display of psychological abuse disguised as instruction, Claire pulled me aside and revealed information that fundamentally changed everything I thought I understood about my father's involvement in Dylan's ongoing struggles at school and in social situations. Frank has been secretly contacting Dylan's school for several months, presenting himself as a concerned grandparent while actually gathering ammunition for these cruel assessments. Claire whispered with urgent desperation, glancing nervously toward Frank to ensure he couldn't overhear our conversation. He's been meeting regularly with Mrs. Henderson and the school counselor, convincing them he was trying to help Dylan succeed, while really collecting evidence of every difficulty and challenge to justify this systematic mistreatment. The scope of Frank's manipulation extended far beyond anything I had imagined possible from someone I had trusted and respected throughout my entire life. My own brother Marcus finally admitted, without displaying any apparent shame or recognition of wrongdoing, that he had specifically instructed his children to systematically exclude Dylan from group text messages, social media posts, and school activities based on Frank's strategic recommendations. Dad explained that association with consistently underperforming family members could potentially damage our kids' social reputations and academic opportunities. Marcus said, while cutting another piece of steak completely disconnected from the emotional impact of his words. We have an obligation to protect our children's social standing and future prospects, even if that means making difficult decisions about family relationships and loyalties. Frank had been systematically coaching all the other grandchildren in sophisticated exclusion techniques, teaching them to view Dylan as a social and academic liability, rather than a family member deserving of basic loyalty support and inclusion. The cruelty I was witnessing wasn't spontaneous childhood meanness emerging from natural sibling rivalry, but carefully orchestrated psychological warfare designed and implemented by their own grandfather. The revelation that devastated me most completely came when Frank pulled out detailed hotel confirmation documents and outlined his plans to make this discriminatory ranking system a permanent fixture of all future family interactions and vacation experiences. Next month's family vacation to Myrtle Beach will provide excellent opportunities for continued evaluation and systematic assessment. Frank announced with obvious satisfaction, displaying printed reservations that revealed the full extent of his deliberate discrimination. Environmental factors significantly influence performance outcomes, so accommodation arrangements will reflect current rankings while providing motivation for improvement efforts. Frank had booked luxurious oceanfront suites with private balconies, room service access, and resort privileges for the highest-ranked grandchildren, while reserving a basic interior room with limited amenities for Dylan. The stark contrast in accommodations wasn't accidental oversight, but calculated psychological manipulation designed to ensure that even during supposedly enjoyable family vacations, the hierarchy would remain visible and constantly reinforced. Superior environmental conditions naturally motivate achievement and excellence, while substandard accommodations encourage sincere improvement efforts, Frank explained with the detached reasoning of someone who had completely lost touch with basic human decency and parental responsibility. Children respond positively to clear incentives and consequences that demonstrate the real-world relationship between performance and rewards. But the moment that finally shattered my last thread of patience and tolerance occurred when Frank retrieved his smartphone and began playing video footage he had secretly recorded throughout the entire evening. The clips showed Dylan's tears of confusion and pain, his desperate attempts to understand why his family was rejecting him, and his heartbreaking efforts to gain approval from relatives who had been systematically trained to withhold affection and acceptance. These video recordings will serve as valuable educational tools for future family development sessions, Frank announced with genuine satisfaction and pride in his technological documentation. Upcoming family gatherings will include structured review sessions, where Dylan can observe his behavioral patterns, recognize specific areas requiring modification, and develop concrete plans for meeting family expectations and standards. The realization that my father had been deliberately documenting and preserving my son's emotional pain for his own twisted entertainment and control filled me with a rage more intense than anything I had ever experienced in my adult life. Frank wasn't implementing misguided but well-intentioned discipline or motivation strategies. He was systematically destroying a vulnerable child's developing sense of self-worth, while creating permanent records of the psychological abuse for future manipulation and continued torment. Darter Part 5. I made the crucial decision in that pivotal moment to completely stop fighting Frank's twisted system and instead focus entirely on protecting my son from further psychological damage. Without saying another word to the adults who had enabled and participated in this systematic abuse, I quietly stood up from my position at the main table and walked deliberately over to Dylan's isolated corner, where he sat alone and devastated. My son looked up at me with eyes red and swollen from crying, his small face reflecting confusion, pain, and desperate hope that someone might finally intervene on his behalf. In a voice barely above a whisper, he asked the question that will haunt me for the rest of my life, and fundamentally changed how I understood my responsibilities as his father. "Why doesn't Grandpa love me, Daddy?" The pure, innocent heartbreak contained in those 7 simple words crystallized everything I needed to understand about this nightmarish situation and my family's toxic dysfunction. Dylan wasn't failing Frank's elaborate system because he lacked inherent worth potential or capability. Frank's system had been deliberately designed to ensure Dylan's failure because it measured everything except the qualities that actually mattered in determining human value: kindness, creativity, empathy, resilience, and authentic character. I sat down beside my son in the uncomfortable chair at his tiny table and wrapped my arm around his thin shoulders, feeling him lean into me with desperate relief as he realized for the first time all evening that he wasn't completely alone in this room full of people who should have protected, loved, and supported him unconditionally. While maintaining a calm exterior that wouldn't escalate the already volatile situation, I began systematically documenting everything with my own smartphone, creating evidence that would prove crucial for the legal protections I was already planning to implement. I recorded Frank's continued cruel commentary about Dylan's failures and inadequacies, captured clear audio of the other children's systematic bullying and harassment, and filmed the stark visual contrast between Dylan's basic paper plate meal and the elaborate feast being enjoyed by his supposedly superior cousins. My phone buzzed insistently with incoming texts from Sarah Dylan's mother and my ex-wife, who had been desperately trying to reach me for the past hour. Her urgent messages revealed information that made Frank's behavior even more sinister and calculated than I had previously realized possible from someone I had once trusted and respected. "Call me immediately." Sarah's text read with obvious desperation and fear. "Your father has been contacting me directly about Dylan for months. The things he's been saying are completely inappropriate and frankly terrifying. This has gone far beyond normal grandparent concern into something much darker and more controlling. I stepped outside the private dining room into the restaurant's main corridor to call Sarah, who answered on the first ring with barely controlled fury and genuine fear in her voice. Her revelations about Frank's secret campaign against our co-parenting relationship exposed yet another layer of his systematic manipulation and abuse. "Garrett, your father, has been harassing me consistently for months, with increasingly aggressive demands and suggestions," Sarah said without any preliminary conversation, her voice shaking with anger and protective maternal instinct. "He's been pressuring me to put Dylan in specialized corrective therapy programs and suggesting that our son might have serious developmental disabilities that embarrass your family's reputation and social standing." Sarah had been deliberately shielding me from Frank's direct attacks on our parenting decisions and Dylan's well-being, hoping to avoid creating additional family conflict while protecting our son from the stress of knowing his grandfather viewed him as fundamentally defective and problematic. Frank called me just last week to suggest that Dylan's reading struggles indicate much broader cognitive problems that require professional intervention. Sarah continued, her protective anger building with each revelation. "Your father actually had the audacity to ask me whether I had considered voluntarily giving up custody because Dylan's developmental issues were becoming too much trouble for everyone involved and might benefit from institutional care." The shocking revelation that Frank had been working systematically behind both parents' backs to undermine Dylan's relationship with his mother while simultaneously attacking me, demonstrated the calculated nature of his psychological campaign. This wasn't about motivation improvement or family harmony. Frank was implementing a deliberate strategy to isolate Dylan from every source of support, validation, and unconditional love in his young life. When I returned to the private dining room, I began strategically engaging other family members in seemingly casual conversations that gradually revealed the comprehensive scope of Frank's manipulative behavior and the extent to which fear had silenced potential allies who might have protected Dylan if they had possessed the courage to resist Frank's financial and emotional control. My Uncle Robert quietly confessed that Frank had been systematically pressuring him to exclude Dylan from his own children's birthday parties and social gatherings, claiming that Dylan's presence made other children uncomfortable and created unnecessary social complications that reflected poorly on our family's reputation within the community. "I've been feeling absolutely terrible about participating in this exclusion," Robert admitted, while glancing nervously toward Frank to ensure our conversation remained private. "But your father made it seem like including Dylan would actually be doing him a disservice by setting him up for social failure and embarrassment." Frank convinced me that protecting Dylan from situations where he might struggle was actually an act of kindness. My cousin Amanda revealed that Frank had explicitly threatened to withdraw his substantial financial contribution to her college education when she attempted to defend Dylan during a family barbecue the previous summer. His retaliation against anyone who questioned his treatment of Dylan was swift, decisive, and financially devastating for young adults who depended on his support for their educational and professional opportunities. Frank told me that genuine family loyalty meant supporting excellence and achievement rather than enabling mediocrity through misplaced sympathy, Amanda whispered, with obvious guilt and regret. "I stopped standing up for Dylan because I simply couldn't afford to lose Frank's financial support for my education. I knew it was wrong, but I felt trapped between protecting Dylan and protecting my own future." Each conversation revealed another carefully constructed layer of Frank's systematic campaign to isolate Dylan, while ensuring that other family members remained too frightened or financially dependent to risk intervention. He had created an intricate web of control that made resistance costly and dangerous for anyone who might have challenged his authority or questioned his methods. The most shocking discovery came when Amanda revealed that Frank had been meeting with Dylan's school counselor under completely false pretenses, claiming to have legal guardianship authority that allowed him to access confidential information about my son's emotional development, therapeutic needs, and psychological assessments. Frank told the counselor that you and Sarah had granted him educational decision-making authority because of your work schedules, Amanda explained, after overhearing a phone conversation during a school pickup. He convinced them that understanding Dylan's psychological weaknesses would allow for targeted intervention strategies designed to help him succeed academically and socially. Frank had been systematically exploiting professional therapeutic insights and confidential counseling session notes to inflict maximum psychological damage while maintaining the public appearance of concerned grandparent involvement in Dylan's educational development. He was using sensitive information about Dylan's anxiety, self-esteem struggles, and emotional vulnerabilities as weapons, rather than seeking genuine solutions or support for these challenges. Part 6. As our disastrous family dinner approached its calculated conclusion, Frank orchestrated one final demonstration of his power and control by ceremoniously announcing the total financial cost of our evening and his expectations for payment distribution among the family units present. This moment revealed yet another layer of his systematic discrimination and provided the perfect opportunity for me to make a decisive statement about our future relationship. This elaborate family celebration represents a substantial investment of exactly $280. Frank declared, with obvious pride, producing an itemized receipt that he had clearly prepared in advance with meticulous attention to detail. Each family unit will contribute proportionally according to their social standing within our family structure and the relative value they added to tonight's gathering and celebration. The detailed financial breakdown Frank presented revealed another carefully planned aspect of his discriminatory system, designed to punish Dylan's presence while rewarding the participation of grandchildren who met his arbitrary approval standards. He expected me to contribute $75, representing the largest single-family payment specifically, because Dylan's attendance had supposedly required special accommodations and created disruptions that diminished the dining experience for everyone else. Additional restaurant staffing was required to manage Dylan's behavioral issues and emotional outbursts. Frank explained while highlighting specific line items on the detailed receipt with obvious satisfaction. The establishment provided extra cleanup materials, required additional management intervention due to disturbances, and needed specialized service accommodations that wouldn't have been necessary if all children had demonstrated appropriate public behavior and self-control. Marcus and Jessica were expected to contribute only $40, despite having ordered the most expensive menu items and consuming 3 full bottles of premium wine throughout the evening. The twins had each selected lobster tail appetizers, followed by elaborate dessert courses, while Brandon had consumed 2 full appetizer portions, in addition to his aged steak dinner and specialty beverage selections. Frank's financial calculation deliberately ignored the actual consumption and cost differences, instead basing payment expectations on his subjective assessment of each family's social contribution to the evening's success. Dylan's basic hamburger and single soft drink had cost exactly $12, yet Frank was demanding that I pay more than 6 times that amount as punishment for bringing an allegedly problematic child to his birthday celebration. I learned through Claire's whispered revelations that this financial discrimination had become Frank's standard practice across all family events and gatherings over the past 18 months, representing another tool in his systematic campaign to make Dylan's participation increasingly burdensome and expensive for me, while subsidizing the involvement of children who earned his approval. Christmas dinner cost you $120, while Marcus paid only $60. Claire quietly informed me while showing calculations she had been tracking on her smartphone. Easter brunch required $90 from your family versus $30 from Jessica's family. Every single gathering has been financially structured to make Dylan's presence expensive while rewarding the participation of his cousins. Frank had been implementing this discriminatory pricing system across birthday parties, holiday celebrations, and vacation activities using financial pressure as psychological manipulation designed to gradually discourage Dylan's attendance at family events. The strategy was particularly insidious because it created the appearance of fairness while actually penalizing my son for existing within his own family structure. Frank had even extended this financial manipulation to gift exchanges and birthday celebrations, according to his ranking system, ensuring that every aspect of family interaction reinforced his hierarchical messages about worthiness and value. Top-performing grandchildren received substantial monetary gifts and elaborate presents purchased from expensive retailers, while Dylan consistently received token items from discount stores and clearance sections. Dylan needs to understand that privileges and generous treatment must be earned through consistent effort and measurable improvement. Frank had explained to questioning family members when they noticed the obvious disparities in gift value and thoughtfulness. Providing identical experiences regardless of individual performance teaches children that mediocrity and lack of effort are acceptable approaches to life and relationships. The spending disparities weren't accidental oversight or budget constraints, but carefully calculated psychological messaging designed to reinforce Frank's assessment of each grandchild's relative value and potential. Every birthday, every holiday, every celebration became an opportunity to demonstrate who deserved investment and attention, versus who required motivation through deliberate neglect. Marcus casually revealed during our payment discussion that Frank had recently funded his children's private tennis lessons, specialized academic tutoring, and elaborate European educational tour, while simultaneously claiming that his fixed retirement income made additional educational expenses completely impossible when I had requested help with Dylan's reading specialist. Dad believes in investing resources where they'll generate the highest returns, Marcus explained, without recognizing the cruelty of his words. Brandon and the twins demonstrate consistent achievement that justifies educational investments, while Dylan's performance suggests that additional tutoring might not produce meaningful improvements worth the financial expenditure. Frank produced a comprehensive spreadsheet tracking every dollar he had invested in each grandchild over the previous 3 years, with individual columns showing financial commitments, educational expenses, and recreational opportunities provided to each child. Dylan's column reflected minimal and steadily decreasing financial support, while his cousins enjoyed substantial and growing investments in their development, enrichment, and opportunities. Objective data demonstrates clear patterns of return on investment. Frank explained, while running his finger down the numerical comparisons with obvious satisfaction. Children who demonstrate appreciation for financial investment through improved academic and social performance deserve continued and expanded support. Those who fail to capitalize on provided opportunities receive proportionally reduced resources until they demonstrate genuine commitment to change and improvement. The spreadsheet revealed Frank's deliberate strategy of creating self-fulfilling prophecies by systematically denying Dylan access to the very opportunities, resources, and experiences that might have helped him succeed according to Frank's narrow metrics. My son was being constantly criticized for lacking achievements that Frank had made impossible for him to obtain through his discriminatory resource allocation. But the revelation that finally pushed me beyond my tolerance threshold came when Robert quietly informed me that Frank had been secretly contacting my workplace supervisor to express concerns about Dylan's behavioral issues, reflecting poorly on my parenting abilities, professional judgment, and overall fitness for career advancement within my company. Frank suggested to your boss that family problems might be negatively affecting your job performance and decision-making capabilities, Robert whispered, while pretending to examine the dessert menu. He was hoping that external pressure from your employer would force you to be more strict with Dylan or seek professional help for what he characterized as serious behavioral and developmental problems requiring immediate intervention. Frank's manipulation extended far beyond family dynamics into every aspect of our lives as he worked systematically to isolate Dylan, not just within our extended family, but throughout our entire social, educational, and professional community. His goal was creating enough external pressure and criticism that I would eventually abandon my son's emotional needs and authentic development in favor of Frank's demands for conformity achievement and artificial behavioral modifications. To Part 7. I reached into my wallet with deliberate calm and precision, counting out exact change while every person at both tables watched in confused silence, unable to comprehend that someone might actually resist Frank's financial manipulation and psychological control. $26 covered Dylan's basic hamburger, and my own completely untouched meal, perfectly representing every penny that Frank would ever receive from either of us for any purpose or occasion. I placed the carefully counted bills directly in the center of the main table, where Frank couldn't possibly miss them, ensuring that everyone present could witness my deliberate rejection of his discriminatory payment system and the psychological manipulation it represented. This amount represents every penny you'll ever receive from Dylan and me for any reason, I announced clearly and calmly, ensuring that every family member could hear and understand the finality of my decision. We're leaving this restaurant immediately, And this represents the last time you'll see either of us until you develop the capacity to understand that children deserve unconditional love, regardless of their test scores, athletic abilities, or performance on arbitrary evaluation systems. Frank's expression transformed dramatically from confident control and satisfaction to genuine shock and growing panic as he realized that I was completely serious about walking away from his financial demands, emotional manipulation, and systematic psychological abuse. The man who had spent the entire evening orchestrating Dylan's humiliation and demonstrating his power over family relationships suddenly found himself losing control of the situation he had so carefully created. I stood up from my position at Dylan's small table and began addressing the entire gathering with the calm authority of someone who had finally seen through years of manipulation, gaslighting, and psychological abuse disguised as family leadership and concern for children's development. Dylan demonstrates genuine kindness toward elderly neighbors who live alone on our street, helping them carry heavy groceries and spending time sitting with them when they feel lonely or forgotten. I began sharing specific examples of character and compassion that Frank's ranking system completely ignored, while highlighting the moral deficits of the grandchildren he claimed represented superior achievement and family values. He creates beautiful original artwork that he gives freely to classmates who seem sad left out or struggling with personal challenges, offering comfort and friendship without expecting recognition or reward. Dylan shows natural empathy and emotional intelligence that none of your supposedly high-achieving grandchildren have demonstrated during this entire evening of systematic cruelty and deliberate exclusion. Each specific example I shared revealed authentic qualities and character traits that Frank's narrow performance metrics failed to recognize or value, while simultaneously exposing the selfishness, entitlement, and casual cruelty that characterized the behavior of the grandchildren he had ranked as superior family members. Brandon had never shown genuine interest in helping others, unless such assistance provided direct personal benefit or social recognition. The twins treated restaurant staff, store clerks, and service workers with casual disrespect, while expecting constant praise and admiration for meeting basic behavioral expectations. Tommy consistently followed his older cousin's example in excluding and mocking children who failed to meet their arbitrary social standards. Real success in life means raising children who genuinely care about other people's well-being and happiness, not raising children who compete for adult approval by systematically tearing down family members who don't fit artificial performance categories. I continued watching several adults shift uncomfortably as they recognized their own parenting failures, reflected in my words and observations. The restaurant's general manager materialized beside our table, having observed sufficient portions of the evening's events to understand that something deeply inappropriate and harmful had been occurring within his establishment. His intervention provided external validation that normal people recognized Frank's behavior as abusive rather than acceptable family discipline. "Sir, I wanted to personally validate your parking for this evening," the manager said diplomatically, handing me a complimentary ticket, while looking directly at Dylan with genuine kindness and concern. "Your son has demonstrated exceptional patience and remarkably good manners throughout dinner, despite experiencing obviously difficult circumstances that no child should have to endure." Other diners who had been observing our family's dysfunction began approaching as we prepared to leave, offering spontaneous support that provided a stark contrast to the rejection Dylan had experienced from his own relatives. An elderly couple specifically complimented Dylan's polite behavior and respectful demeanor throughout the meal, while a mother dining with her own young children expressed clear disapproval of the treatment they had witnessed from nearby tables. Sometimes the people who know us least treat us with more genuine dignity and respect than those who should love us most, I observed, taking Dylan's small hand while he still clutched the carefully wrapped gift he had made for Frank, somehow still hoping to salvage a relationship that had never truly existed in any healthy or meaningful form. I announced my immediate implementation of complete and permanent no contact with Frank, effective from that precise moment, and continuing indefinitely until he demonstrated genuine understanding of the psychological damage he had inflicted and made concrete changes to his behavior and attitudes toward children. There will be no phone calls, no text messages, no family gatherings, no financial assistance of any kind, and absolutely no access to Dylan whatsoever. I declared firmly while blocking Frank's phone number and beginning mental preparations for the extensive boundary setting that would be required. I'll be informing Dylan's school tomorrow morning to remove you from all authorized contact lists and ensure that you have no access to his educational records counseling sessions or any other aspect of his development. The power dynamic within the room had shifted completely and irreversibly. Frank, who had entered the evening confident in his control over family relationships and financial leverage, suddenly found himself facing the complete loss of access to his grandson and the public exposure of his systematic psychological abuse in front of family members who had previously supported or tolerated his methods. But my final strategic move was the revelation that truly terrified Frank and Marcus, while ensuring that other family members would understand the full scope of what had been occurring. I held up my smartphone, clearly displaying the recording application that had been running continuously throughout the entire dinner conversation. Every single word of tonight's conversation has been documented and preserved. I announced with calm determination. Frank's ranking system, the financial discrimination, the systematic emotional abuse, and everyone's participation in Dylan's deliberate humiliation and psychological torture has been recorded completely. I now possessed hours of clear audio and video evidence that would prove exactly what had occurred if anyone ever questioned my decision to protect Dylan from further contact with his grandfather. More importantly, I intended to share this comprehensive documentation with other family members who needed to understand the true nature of Frank's behavior and make their own informed decisions about his role in their children's lives and development. Frank's face had drained of color entirely as he realized that his carefully constructed public image as a loving grandfather and successful family patriarch was about to be exposed to everyone who mattered in his social, professional, and community circles. Thus, Report 8. 6 months have passed since that devastating confrontation at Romano's steakhouse, and the transformation in our lives has exceeded every expectation I held for recovery and healing. Dylan has flourished in an environment completely free from Frank's constant criticism, arbitrary comparisons, and systematic psychological manipulation, finally able to develop his authentic interests and natural abilities without fear of judgment ranking or conditional approval from family members. His reading comprehension has improved dramatically beyond anything his teachers thought possible once we removed the pressure and anxiety that Frank's academic obsession had created through months of systematic undermining. Working with a patient, encouraging tutor who focuses on celebrating progress rather than demanding perfection, Dylan discovered his genuine love for adventure stories, science fiction novels, and fantasy series that capture his imagination and creativity. Dylan reads voraciously now with the enthusiasm of someone who has reclaimed joy in learning, often staying up past his bedtime with a flashlight hidden under his covers, because he cannot resist continuing compelling stories that transport him to magical worlds where kindness and courage triumph over cruelty and injustice. His artistic talents, which Frank had consistently dismissed as worthless pursuits that distracted from more important academic and athletic achievements, earned prestigious recognition in a regional young artists competition that celebrates creativity and original expression. Dylan's watercolor painting of a family of elephants protecting their youngest member from danger won first place in the elementary school division, bringing him the genuine achievement and confident pride that Frank's manufactured challenges and artificial rankings never could have provided. The emotional healing has proven equally profound and transformative. Dylan began working with a child psychologist who specializes in family trauma and systematic psychological abuse, learning healthy techniques for processing the rejection and humiliation he experienced while gradually rebuilding his fundamental sense of self-worth and personal value. Through art therapy, play therapy, and age-appropriate discussion techniques, Dylan has developed vocabulary for understanding that Frank's treatment reflected Frank's problems, rather than any deficiency in Dylan's character or potential. This crucial distinction has protected Dylan from internalizing the cruel messages about his worthiness that could have damaged his self-esteem permanently. I'm really good at art and being kind to people and helping others feel better when they're sad. Dylan told me recently with the simple, honest confidence that every 7-year-old deserves to feel about themselves. That's what makes me special and important, not getting perfect grades or winning trophies or being the best at everything like Grandpa Frank wanted. Sarah and I have grown significantly closer as co-parents through this challenging experience, united in our shared commitment to protecting Dylan from toxic family dynamics, while providing him with the unconditional love support and acceptance that healthy child development requires. She has expressed deep gratitude for my decision to prioritize Dylan's emotional well-being over family harmony and social expectations. You showed Dylan that he's genuinely worth fighting for and protecting, Sarah said during one of our weekly coordination meetings. That fundamental lesson about his inherent value will serve him well throughout his entire life whenever he encounters people who try to make him feel inadequate, unworthy, or conditionally acceptable based on artificial performance standards. The positive ripple effects of our no-contact decision have exposed Frank's manipulative treatment of other family members in ways none of us anticipated, leading to broader conversations about the toxic patterns that had been normalized and accepted within our extended family for generations, without question or resistance. My cousin Robert made the difficult decision to significantly limit Frank's access to his own children after learning about the comprehensive ranking system and understanding its profound psychological impact on developing minds. I realized that my kids were learning to treat love and acceptance as commodities that had to be earned through performance, rather than gifts freely given within healthy family relationships, Robert explained with obvious regret. That's definitely not the foundational lesson I want them carrying into their own future relationships and parenting decisions. Amanda successfully transferred to a different university and secured alternative funding sources to escape Frank's financial control over her educational choices and career development. Living under constant evaluation judgment and threat of financial retaliation was systematically destroying my mental health and self-confidence, she admitted with relief. I'd rather manage student loans and work study programs than spend 4 more years trying to meet impossible standards for approval that kept changing whenever I thought I had satisfied his expectations. Marcus and Jessica's marriage entered intensive counseling when Jessica finally recognized how their enthusiastic participation in Frank's ranking system had affected their own children's developing capacity for empathy, genuine human connection, and basic moral reasoning. Brandon's systematic cruelty toward Dylan had reflected broader patterns of entitlement and superiority that were damaging his relationships with peers, teachers, and other adults throughout his social environment. We inadvertently taught our children that love and family loyalty were conditional rewards based on achievement rather than fundamental commitments that don't fluctuate based on performance. Jessica acknowledged during a tearful phone conversation filled with genuine remorse. Watching them become bullies who ranked other people's worth according to arbitrary criteria made me realize we had completely lost sight of what actually matters in raising good human beings with strong character. Frank has attempted reconciliation repeatedly through intermediary family members and increasingly desperate written communications, but he consistently refuses to acknowledge the psychological harm he caused or accept personal responsibility for his systematic emotional abuse and deliberate psychological manipulation. His letters and messages focus obsessively on Dylan's missed opportunities for improvement, rather than expressing genuine remorse for the pain, confusion, and trauma he deliberately inflicted. The boy could have benefited tremendously from structured challenges and honest feedback about his performance deficits, Frank wrote in his most recent attempt at re-establishing contact. Protecting him from realistic expectations and necessary criticism will only handicap his future development and success in competitive academic and professional environments that won't accommodate his sensitivity. His complete inability to understand that children need unconditional love and acceptance, rather than constant evaluation and criticism, demonstrates that he remains fundamentally unchanged despite experiencing the natural consequences of his harmful behavior. Frank's physical health has declined noticeably due to stress and increasing isolation from family members, but he continues to view himself as the victim of our unreasonable expectations, rather than recognizing himself as the perpetrator of systematic psychological abuse. Dylan occasionally asks about his grandfather with the natural curiosity of a child who remembers fragments of their relationship but lacks complete understanding of why contact ended so abruptly. I explain honestly and age-appropriately that some people struggle with showing love in healthy ways, and that protecting himself from harmful relationships represents an important life skill that will serve him throughout his development. Grandpa Frank had trouble seeing how special and wonderful you are because he was focused on the wrong things. I tell Dylan when these conversations arise naturally. He was so concerned with grades and competitions that he missed your kind heart, creative spirit, and all the qualities that make you uniquely valuable as a person. Dylan accepts this explanation with the remarkable resilience that children demonstrate when they feel truly supported, valued, and protected by adults who prioritize their well-being over social expectations or family obligations. He understands intuitively that my decision to limit contact with Frank emerged from love rather than anger, and he trusts completely that I will always prioritize his emotional safety and authentic development over external pressures to maintain problematic relationships. Our smaller family unit has grown stronger, healthier, and more connected without Frank's poisonous influence contaminating our interactions and undermining Dylan's developing sense of identity and self-worth. We spend time together now based on genuine enjoyment of each other's company, rather than obligation, performance evaluation, or the need to prove worthiness for love and acceptance. Dylan recently received a school award for kindness and community service recognition that reflects his natural empathy and sincere desire to help others, rather than any attempt to meet external standards or earn adult approval through artificial achievements. Watching him accept that honor with quiet pride filled me with genuine satisfaction that had everything to do with witnessing the beautiful person he's becoming when allowed to grow authentically, and nothing to do with competition ranking or comparison with other children. I have learned that protecting children from toxic family dynamics requires tremendous courage, commitment, and willingness to sacrifice relationships that seem important but actually cause more harm than benefit. Breaking generational patterns of conditional love and emotional manipulation means accepting that some relationships cannot be salvaged without compromising our children's fundamental well-being and future emotional health. True family love means creating safe space for children to develop their authentic selves, explore their genuine interests, and build confidence through real accomplishments, rather than forcing them to conform to arbitrary standards of achievement or behavior that serve adult needs for control, rather than children's needs for acceptance and support. Dylan's worth was never determined by Frank's elaborate ranking system, but by his inherent dignity as a unique human being, deserving of unconditional love, respect, and support, regardless of his academic performance, athletic ability, or social development compared to other children. Every child possesses intrinsic value that doesn't require justification through achievement or performance. The most crucial lesson from this painful but ultimately transformative experience is that sometimes the most genuinely loving action we can take involves walking away from people who refuse to change their harmful behavior, even when those people are family members we once respected, trusted, and wanted to please. Creating firm boundaries around toxic relationships teaches children that they deserve consistent kindness and respect throughout their lives. Dylan continues thriving in ways that Frank's system never could have fostered, developing authentic confidence through genuine achievement while maintaining the compassion, creativity, and emotional intelligence that make him uniquely himself. Our family has healed stronger and healthier without Frank's destructive influence, demonstrating clearly that love should inspire growth and authentic development rather than demand conformity to narrow definitions of success and worthiness. Have you ever faced the heartbreaking choice between maintaining family relationships and protecting someone you love from systematic emotional harm and psychological manipulation? What would you do if confronted with a situation where a family member was deliberately undermining a child's developing sense of self-worth through constant comparison, conditional approval, and systematic exclusion from family love and support? How do you balance loyalty to older family members with the responsibility to protect children from toxic dynamics that could affect their emotional development for years to come? I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts, experiences, and perspectives in the comments below. And if this story resonated with your own family experiences or helped you recognize similar patterns in your relationships, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more authentic stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and the courage required to break harmful generational patterns. Sharing this video might help other parents recognize warning signs of systematic emotional abuse and find the strength to prioritize their children's well-being over family expectations and social pressure to maintain relationships that cause more damage than healing. Thank you for listening to our journey with patience and understanding. And I sincerely hope that Dylan's story serves as a powerful reminder that every child deserves to feel valued, accepted, and loved for exactly who they are, rather than who others believe they should become to meet arbitrary standards of achievement and performance.